Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys hanging out here with you on a midday Monday today, after a fairly successful weekend, surprisingly perhaps successful weekend for the LSU baseball team. Hanging out here with Koki Riley, our LSU baseball writer. We are going to discuss, obviously, LSU's very useful series win over the number one rated Texas A&M Aggies at Alex Box Stadium, and what that means for their postseason chances as we go down the road here, as we start to close down the regular season and look forward to Hoover and maybe, if you're an LSU fan, crossing your fingers, maybe a trip to the NCAA regionals, and we will see what goes on from there. Again, LSU takes Game 1 and Game 2 against Texas A&M, both by scores of 6-4. Get roughed up a little bit in the series finale, but certainly put themselves in great position to be able to possibly make a postseason charge into Hoover and into the regionals. Koki, how was your weekend?
Doing pretty. It was interesting.
It was eventful, was it not?
It was extremely eventful.
Perhaps
and
more eventful than you thought, any of us thought going in, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely, especially after Saturday.
Yes.
You figure that, they can take one of those two games, but probably not both, and they took both, so here we are. Some
clutch performances, certainly on both of those days, from some names that maybe haven't gotten up onto the marquee lately because those clutch performances had not been there. So we will get into all of that, and we will discuss some business first as well. If you are watching the LSU Sports Insider or listening to the LSU Sports Insider, you already know, of course, that the Advocate's the number one destination for all things LSU sports related. So if you haven't joined us already, please join us and subscribe to The Advocate, whether that's in print or digital. You go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Of course, spring practice wrapping up, all sorts of other things, as always, going on. LSU women's team just gets a roster revamp. And, of course, the LSU football team is still looking for defensive tackles. Koki, I don't know if you've got any eligibility left. I'm going to guess the answer is no.
I got to put on a couple more pounds, too.
I mean, let's try anything right now. Let's try something pretty revolutionary. Have a couple of us 150-pound guys up on the defensive line. See how that works out. But anyway, plenty going on. We've got a Q&A with Matt McMahon, the LSU men's basketball coach, up at theadvocate.com right now. But you would get all those headlines delivered straight to your inbox if you subscribe to the LSU newsletter. Get your hands all around everything that's going on campus at LSU, sent to your inbox, to your desktop, to your phone, all in one place. So you can sign up for that at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday live on the LSU Sports Insider. We're here on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on that YouTube channel. You should be able to find it, should be able to subscribe, and that way you will never miss an episode. You can catch us live there on Monday and Thursday. If you don't catch us live, you can catch us there after the fact. And also, if you don't dig your podcasts on YouTube, you can do it on the more traditional way, which of course is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. Just search for LSU Sports Insider, and you should be able to find it out. So here we go. LSU wins, as I said, 6-4 on Friday. LSU wins again 6-4 on Saturday. The bullpen does not have what you would call a masterful performance. I can't perform. Masterful performance on Sunday as A&M roughs them up pretty good, 14-4. But that puts them at 31-18 overall, 9-15 in the SEC. This is unofficial. I went on D1 Baseball today and found that their RPI is up to number 33. Mm-hmm. They're going to hit the road and face Alabama in Tuscaloosa this weekend. Alabama's got an RPI of 16, and then they'll close it out next weekend. They're tied with Ole Miss in the SEC West standings at 9-15 in conference. They're tied, I guess, for fifth in the West, in the SEC West. And Ole Miss, they will close it out at Alex Box with Ole Miss, who's got a 25 RPI. So 6 games left. In all likelihood, if we want to talk about first and foremost about LSU's postseason chances, you and I have discussed many times on this podcast, we think that the bare minimum that LSU needs to get to to be able to give themselves a shot, at least as they close out the regular season, is to get to 13 wins. Get to 13 and 17 in conference. Ideally, you'd get to 14 and 16 in conference. But if you get to 13 and 17 in conference and then make a little noise in Hoover, all of a sudden you start to feel pretty good about your chances to make the NCAA regionals. But to get to 13 and 17, you got to go 4-2. To get to 14 and 16, you got to go 5-1 over these final 6 games, which would be a tall order, I think. But then again, maybe not. Alabama is certainly formidable. Ole Miss is going to be fighting for their postseason lives as well. And so, just tell us where you feel like things stand and what their chances are looking like coming out of this weekend. Certainly better than they were going in.
Yes, absolutely. I think heading into last weekend, I thought their chances were well below 50%.
Yep.
In terms of, what would we say? They had to go 6-3 over the last 9 games. The fact that they were able to knock 2 of those wins off of against the number 1 team in the nation really, really changes the math. And I think we glancingly mentioned if they won this series, it would drastically change things for this team, and I think it has.
Yes.
I really do think it has, because these next 2 opponents aren't as talented as Texas A&M. That's just the reality of the matter. I think this Alabama team, although they're probably more firmly in the field than LSU is, I don't think they're quite as talented as this LSU team is, and Mississippi State roughed them up a bit this past weekend as well. And with Ole Miss, they won the series against Auburn, but they didn't sweep. Lost on a walk-off. I think it was a walk-off wild pitch yesterday. So I think those 2 teams. I think if you're going into both those series, LSU's probably might be the slight favorite in both of them, and at least one of them in the Ole Miss series, since they're going to be at home for that weekend. This Alabama series, it's going to be absolutely massive for them. It's going to be absolutely massive for Alabama. And the one thing I do want to mention about Alabama is that they played Troy on I think it's Tuesday,
right.
And Troy's a real tournament team.
A good RPI team.
Yeah, Troy's going to be a top 2 seed in the tournament, and they're probably the best team in that conference. So that's not going to be easy for them. So Alabama's next 4 games are going to be absolutely huge for them, and then they finish off the season against Auburn. Ole Miss faces Texas A&M, funnily enough, at home this upcoming weekend, and then they obviously head to Baton Rouge. So that's sort of the outlook for those other 2 teams, and that's sort of the outlook for LSU moving forward.
So let's talk about this series. Before we got on the air here, Koki, you were saying that atmosphere was a little dim on Friday. Understandably. I mean, comparatively
by LSU
speaking,
standards.
Yeah, comparatively speaking, a little dim on Friday. Obviously, the fan base probably disappointed by this season, frankly, and didn't show up like you would typically see a crowd show up for a Texas A&M series coming down the stretch. But nonetheless, it was an important game, huge game. We will get to the performances of Gage Jump on Friday night and Luke Holman, the starting pitchers, on Saturday night. But first things first, I want to talk about the bullpen, and we will sort of work backwards at least a little bit. Let's start with Friday. A Jump gives you what you need for 5 1/3 innings. But now it's up to a bullpen that has been inconsistent, and I'm being polite when I say that. But Fidel Ulloa and Griffin Herring, they go 3 2/3, allow 1 earned run, and they close it out. They get the job done. That has to be a huge. Griffin Herring is not necessarily surprising that he would come in and do a fine job, but Ulloa and just generally speaking, the notion that you got to throw it to the bullpen to have them finish it off and come through, and they did. And that was a huge step for LSU, was it not?
I think one of the reasons why I thought they could win a game in this series is because I thought they had just enough bullpen to win a game in this series.
To win a game.
Yeah, a game, yes. And a lot has to do with Griffin Herring, as you mentioned. A lot has to do with the fact that I thought their starters could go 5, 6, maybe even 7 innings and keep them in the game while doing so. And that's what kind of happened. But to get those 4 outs from Fidel is absolutely huge.
Yes.
That just bridged the gap to Griffin, who could pretty comfortably close out the game. And I mean, we're going to get to the offense, but, complementary baseball matters a lot in these sort of scenarios as well. So, they didn't have to push Griffin quite as much, and they could sort of run with Fidel a little bit longer because of some things that happened offensively. So, I mean, Fidel looked excellent, and I think Coach Jay Johnson sort of referenced to the fact that he hasn't been 100% for this entire season. His health's kind of been a little bit up and down, but he's been much healthier lately. And you definitely saw that in the results. He's a really good slider. His fastball's up to 95. So, it's not the most I wouldn't say it's like the most deceptive delivery, but at the same time, when he pounds the strike zone and he sort of gets into a rhythm, we saw at the very beginning of the season, he could be a very he might, if he can stay healthy, then he might be sort of in, the quote unquote circle of trust for Jay Johnson. And obviously Griffin Herring is like the captain of that circle of trust, but maybe you can put Fidel in that too. And with, 3 or 4 other guys, I'd say at this point, and we can talk about Saturday to sort of expand on that.
Just as you said, he was Ulloa was off to a great start early in this season. That was one of the many, many reasons that going into the season, we all thought that LSU's bullpen was going to be a strength. And so if he comes back around and, just as you say, earns that trust and, comes in a high leverage situation and or eats up a couple of innings or key outs or something like that, that's a big, big step in the right direction for LSU's bullpen. Saturday night, I thought was really, I don't want to call it a special night because there have been so many special nights at Alec Box, but it was a nice moment, a really, really good moment, and touching is a little bit too corny, I would say, but it was an electric kind of moment, and certainly it was a feel good moment, I would say. Well, let's get to what we're talking about actually here. Holman comes off the mound and he turns it over to Christian Little. Christian Little, of course, comes here from Vanderbilt 2 years ago. We all assume he's going to be a part. He comes because he's intending to become a part of the weekend rotation. Did not have a good go of it. Hasn't had a good go of it for most of his stay at LSU. But boy, when they needed him on Saturday, Christian Little, 3 2/3, 1 earned run, 6 strikeouts, 1 walk. He almost gets them to the finish, all the way to the finish line. And I just want to sort of drill down on a little moment here. And he runs into some trouble in the ninth. And you can tell, of course, every reliever wants to close it out, but you can tell he really wants to close it out. He's getting about ready to get himself set back up on the rubber, and he sees Jay Johnson come out. And he I don't know if you saw this live. I was watching the broadcast, but you can see him turn around, and he lets loose with, I'm not sure what 4-letter word it was, but it was a 4-letter word. He's frustrated at himself and frustrated that he's, they're baseball players. They all understand it. But frustrated he's getting taken out because he knew he was dealing that night, and that he'd had a great outing, and that he wanted to get it to the finish line, but instead they pull him with 1 out to go. Jay Johnson pulls him. But I just thought it was a great moment that Christian Little comes off the mound, comes toward the dugout, and he got a loud, very appreciative, very thoughtful ovation from the Alec Box crowd. It was a good moment for him.
Yeah. And Christian said after the game that I think someone asked him, how were you feeling when you're, coming off the mound, and Jay was taking you out. He's like mad, disappointed, ticked off, like any other 4-letter word. And I mean, he was amazing, and he wouldn't have given up that 1 run until he just kind of ran out of gas at the end. And what I mean by run out of gas, I mean he physically ran out of gas. Yes. I mean the fastball was down to like 93 at that point, and the stuff wasn't quite as sharp, and he was getting up to a pitch count that he hadn't really gotten to much at all this season. But to get 3 2/3 out of him out of the bullpen and just have him absolutely shut down that Texas A&M lineup, I think I was talking with one scout before the game on Sunday, and I remarked about how well Christian Little was pitching, and he was like, it was almost like seeing a different pitcher on the mound.
Yeah,
like he was that good, that dominant. Fastball was up to 98 miles an hour, and he hit it more than a few times. And that slider was fantastic, and he was hitting up, throwing everything for strikes, and really fooling the Texas A&M hitters. And I mean, if it weren't for that outing, they don't they don't win that
They
game.
don't win that game.
Yeah.
No.
And it was just, again, it was easily his best outing as an LSU Tiger.
Yes. An enormous outing in a very, very clutch spot, and surprising, frankly, in a good way, obviously. And so, who knows what that means? Who knows if Christian Little puts together another outing like that, anything even remotely close to that again. But what a great moment it was for him, and certainly clutch that allowed LSU to escape. Gavin, was it Lohr who came in after him and couldn't get
Lohr threw like 2 pitches, and he got a ground ball that Braswell sort of booted.
He kicked it.
Yeah. And then Guidry got a fly out after a wild pitch that put the game tying run at second base after they were up by 3 with 2 outs. Yes.
But LSU holds on. It was a relatively routine fly ball to center to close it out.
Yes.
This is the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at The Advocate and at NOLA.com. Please subscribe, support your local journalist, particularly all of the. I can't speak today. All of us who are covering LSU for The Advocate and for NOLA.com, like nobody else does. Please subscribe to The Advocate. To do that, of course, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Get a hold of our newsletter. Get all the headlines sent straight to your phone, to your inbox, to your desktop. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And, of course, we are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider. We will probably be taking a longer look at baseball as we go down the road and close it out. We'll have a little bit of softball, too, as the softball team gets ready for the SEC tournament. But we will be here every Monday and Thursday regardless on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube, you should be able to find the page. That way you subscribe, you never miss an episode. You can catch us live. And if you don't catch us live, you can always catch us after the fact on that same YouTube channel. And if you prefer not to get your podcast via YouTube, you can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. So let's talk about the 2 starting pitchers who had to stand tall, and stand tall they did. Gage jump. We talked about this actually before last week at this time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Koki, it felt to me like it put, I didn't want to call it pressure, but yeah, it was pressure. It was pressure to me, that a little bit more pressure on Gage jump to have a great outing, because he's sort of been the one known commodity. It's not to say that Luke Holman has not been a known commodity, but he was starting to struggle just a little bit there for a little stretch. But Jump was, he's your Friday night guy for a reason. You wanted him to have a great outing, and maybe that was, we thought going in, maybe that was going to be your best shot to steal a game from Texas A&M. On Friday, Jump goes, as we said, 5 1/3, 3 runs, 6 hits, 4 strikeouts, no walks. Not dominant, but he certainly gave you everything you needed and more. Yeah,
absolutely. As you said, not totally dominant. I think he only had 4 strikeouts. I think he gave up 6 hits. But the 3 hits that he gave up that were hard hit, those were home runs, and those were the 3 runs that they scored, and that was it.
Now, it's also worth noting that first of all, Texas A&M's got one of the best offenses in the nation, and they were tearing the cover off the ball.
Yes.
The previous 3 series. I mean, they were crushing it. We've referenced this a couple of times, but they got down in one game 9-0 to Georgia and wound up run ruling them 19-9.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no hotter team coming into this weekend than Texas A&M was to Alec Box.
Absolutely. I mean, they were the number 1 team in the country heading into this weekend for a reason. Jace Laviolette is a guy who was a very, very productive player for them last season as a freshman. This year has hit the cover off the ball. Graham Grahovac, he's only a freshman. He's probably going to be the freshman of the year in the SEC this season. He's their leadoff hitter. And this is Brady Montgomery, who's probably one of the best players in the country, who I didn't think he got a hit this. I'm pretty sure he didn't get a hit this weekend. I'd have to look it up again.
I certainly don't remember
heading into Sunday, he didn't have a hit. I'm 100% sure about that. And again, that guy's been one of the best players in the country. They did a really good job of limiting the damage against those 3 guys in particular. And Grahovac didn't do a whole bunch until Sunday either. So when you have that 3-headed monster at the top of the lineup and a very good lineup behind them, it's pretty similar to what LSU had last season themselves.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite up to that super duper star level, but it's darn near close.
There's no such thing as pitching around a guy to get to some other weakness in a lineup.
Yes.
You've got your hands full 1 through 9.
The number 9 hole was really the only, I guess, blind spot they had all weekend. For A&M, that the one part you could go into the series really try to pick at, but again, it's one spot in the lineup. And that top 3 was really the part that you kind of had to hold down in order to win this series, and that's exactly what they did. And I thought Jay Johnson did a pretty good job of sort of managing around that. And I also thought that offensively, I just thought they did a really good job of sort of limiting those 3 guys. That was a huge key to this series.
And Saturday, Luke Holman did pretty much what you needed him to do. Well, we say that, we certainly didn't know what was coming down the line with Christian Little.
Yeah.
But Luke Holman goes 5 innings, 3 runs, 3 hits, 10 strikeouts, 5 walks. The walk total was probably a little bit too high. But nonetheless, he did enough to sort of hold the fort against a very, very potent lineup, to be able to give LSU's bullpen a chance to help him out.
Yeah, it was like a really interesting and wild performance from him, because the thing with A&M's lineup, they're very left-handed heavy, and left-handed hitters sometimes can give Holman some trouble because he's a righty. He doesn't really have that pitch to put away left-handed hitters.
Right.
And against most other SEC teams, that's not going to be a massive issue, just because he has higher quality and he's just a better pitcher than most other SEC pitchers. But against a lineup like this, that matters. And most of the lineups don't have as many left-handed hitters either. So against this lineup, that matters, and that's why you have to go to a splitter a lot more often this weekend. And that was a pitch that, and that's the sort of pitch that you can try to get lefties out with, and just given its movement profile and the fact that it can sort of drop off the table. I mean, changeups are usually what righties go to get lefties out, but as Holman said himself, his changeup stinks. So that's why he goes to that splitter, and it was a very effective pitch for him and had a pretty decent movement profile, and it's something I frankly want to see him throw a little bit more often. I think he said he threw like 10 of those pitches, and that's a big pitch for him.
It's nice to have in your back pocket.
Exactly. Yeah. Against a very left-handed heavy lineup, a team that had multiple switch hitters in the order. So Holman's really facing I don't know, 5 or 6 left-handers, and that's an abnormal number of lefties you have to go up against. And I think he had some trouble sort of figuring out how to get those lefties out without leaving anything too far over the plate, which is why you saw the 3 walks in the first inning, and some of the troubles in that first inning was a real red flag to me, because he hasn't really found the right mix to get these left-handed hitters out, because he doesn't really have that hard out pitch to get lefties out with, and he doesn't want to leave anything over the plate or he's going to get tattooed. Right. So that's why you're getting the walks, right? Yep. And as the game went along, he slowly started to figure things out. But I also want to highlight that 4th inning that he had, where the bases were loaded again, and there was nobody out again. He walks 2 guys. He snaps his glove in frustration, a rare sign of emotion from Luke Holman. And he strikes out the next 3 guys and gets out of the inning, and that really changed the series for them. It looked like LSU was in a whole world of trouble, and they had just tied the game at 3 as well. And it felt like it was inevitable. A&M was going to score at least 2 runs in that sequence, and they didn't. And Holman just did a fantastic job, and a lot of it had to do with that mixing in that splitter more. But his control sort of improved as the rest of the night went on, and I mean, if you're Jay Johnson, you have to be really proud of his performance on Saturday, given the fact that it wasn't a great matchup for him, and he still got 10 strikeouts, for example. Sure.
Well, speaking of clutch performances, let's talk about LSU at the plate. How many times did we walk into this podcast studio, Koki, and talk about? We were actually going to look it up, right? We're going to do the numbers by hand. We might still. LSU with runners in scoring position, what their batting average was, specifically in SEC play. It hasn't. Spoiler alert! It has not been good up to this point. On Friday, they are 4 for 7 with runners in scoring position. That was that. It's almost not possible to emphasize just how clutch that was and how important that was. On Saturday, they didn't do as well with runners on base, but they were 6 for 15 with 2 outs. So a lot of the things that you haven't seen this season from the LSU lineup, which we knew wasn't going to be as strong as last year's lineup because no lineup is that strong, really. But you saw the deficiencies came when they had runners on, leaving a ton of guys on, and also 2 strike hits and 2 out hits. You didn't see a whole lot of that in SEC play coming into this weekend, but now you saw both of those things unfold in 2 different games, which will end up being wins.
Yeah, absolutely. On Friday, it was just they load the bases with nobody out, and in scenarios like that in the past for this LSU team, they've had trouble, putting up real quick numbers on the board.
Right.
4, 5, 6 runs, and they put up 4 runs in the inning. Josh Pearson hits a huge double. Josh Pearson is a big reason why we're talking about this right now.
Yes.
He only had 3 hits all weekend, but 2
of them
were absolutely huge, and even the hit he had on Sunday was big. It was a 2-out RBI knock that increased the lead to 3 at the time, at least before things sort of fell apart for the pitching staff. But we can get to that later. And yeah, Pearson was an absolute huge part of that. And you mentioned the 2-out hitting. Saturday there's a perfect example of that when they were down 3-0. There's 2 outs, and all of a sudden they get back-to-back home runs from Tommy White and Jared Jones. And that's not terribly surprising because those guys can hit a home run at any single moment. But the fact that it came with 2 outs was huge.
Yes.
And then what happened next was Josh Pearson, as we mentioned earlier, he hits a double, and then Hayden Trubisky drives him in. This is all with 2 outs. It's boom, 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 and then all of a sudden you have a tie game. That's the stuff that they just have not done all conference play.
Right.
And they finally did it against a great team in a must-win scenario. And it was just absolutely huge. And if this team wants to, I guess, quote unquote, save its season and make the NCAA tournament, and if they can do stuff like that, they've got a shot. And I think this weekend they proved that they can beat anybody when they're playing at their best, because they literally beat the number 1 team in the country. We already knew this team had talent heading into the season.
Right.
But it's the stuff like that makes the difference. I think that's sort of the best way to put that.
So you feel good about Gage Jump and Luke Holman, obviously. You maybe feel good about some of the people coming out of the pen.
Griffin Herring.
Yeah, certainly Griffin Herring. Again, this was one performance, but it was one for the ages in Christian Little. Coming from Christian Little.
But to be fair to Christian, he's been very good for the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yes.
This isn't like this. It wasn't like they put him in the game and all of a sudden he turned into Superman. This has been building ever so slowly the last few weeks.
But again, that gives you a feeling of, well, okay, maybe that's 2+.
Another guy in the circle of trust. Yes.
Right. As for Sunday.
Oh boy.
Because this was not a flawless weekend, and it did expose some of the things that you've seen for much of this season. It looked for everything like it was always going to kind of be a bullpen game, right?
Yes.
Ackenhausen, it was Ackenhausen who started, right?
Yeah, Ackenhausen started, yes.
And then 6 relievers follow him. I will go through the numbers.
Yep.
7 1/3, 14 runs, all earned.
I didn't add it up.
12 hits, 15 strikeouts, but 10 walks and 2 wild pitches. It was pretty ugly on Sunday, and really nobody came in to stop. Until it was far too late. Nobody really.
There's one exception to that. Aiden Moffitt threw pretty well.
Yeah. And that's a guy with some life in that fastball.
Yes, and he came in a pretty tough spot, gave up a couple singles that added some runs onto Thatcher Hurd's run total, and then he came in and threw, I think it was combined 2 2/3. Basically through the next 2 2/3 without giving up a run, or really anything of really anything.
Right.
And that was pretty good. And against that sort of caliber lineup, and I know it was like kind of garbage time, but it wasn't totally garbage time at that point. It was a 6-run game. It wasn't totally over. It felt like it was over, in the ballpark at least. But it wasn't over until really he came out of the game again. But when I'm talking about the circle of trust, and I want to mention him in that because he is getting close there if not being in there. And I think you throw Gavin Guidry in there, and that's 5 guys, including Fidel Ulloa, that I would say you could at least argue who are guys who are in the circle of trust. I think there's 2 guys who are absolutely in the circle of trust, and probably a third. Like I'd say Guidry's probably. I think if the game was close, Guidry throws on Sunday.
Right.
So I think he's in Johnson's circle of trust. Whether he's like whether fans are as confident with him this year as they were last year, that's another thing we can debate. And,
certainly.
And he hasn't been as good as he was last season. I think that the numbers just bore that out. But at the same time, like he's been better than most of the other guys out of the bullpen this season, and you're throwing a Moffitt, you're throwing a Ulloa. Maybe you can piece something together with those guys, and hopefully you can get more out of Ackenhausen than just an inning and 2/3.
Certainly.
Maybe the hamstring injury had something to do with it, the fact that he couldn't really ramp up as intensely as maybe he would have liked to heading into a start. So I mean, maybe I'm being a little bit too, I guess, sunshine and rainbows and flowers and all that good stuff, unicorns. But I do think you kind of have those guys, and I also want to mention that because to the downside of that, they ran out of gas on Sunday. It's simple.
They did.
Jay Johnson said it, and it wasn't because they physically ran out of gas. It's because they ran out of arms.
Right.
And that can throw against at least a team of this caliber.
Right.
Maybe they had enough arms to, get through a sweep against Auburn or Missouri, and they did. And they just didn't take advantage of that.
Right.
But this weekend they just simply didn't have the juice to get a sweep.
And that doesn't necessarily bode well for if and when LSU gets into the postseason, but you worry about that
later. You got to get there first.
Right. You do bring up Aiden Moffitt, though. I think it's probably, and I'm curious to get your 2 cents on this matter. Is it fair to say? I mean, he always had he could always bring the heat. Command, not necessarily there until maybe recently, and then also certainly, kind of being more of a quote unquote real pitcher. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, and you've seen the progress with him becoming more and more like a real pitcher as the weeks go by, and he definitely had a speed bump in the road against Missouri. He didn't have a lot of runs charged against them, but he gave up a lot of inherited runs in that game.
Right.
But he was excellent against Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
He pitched well this past weekend. I don't think he pitched against Auburn, and I think he gave up a 2-run home run against Grambling, even, which was, wild.
You throw a meatball every once in a while.
Exactly.
It's 26-2.
It was a blowout. But he pitched well again this weekend. So it's someone who has proven that he can pitch well against top competition, and that's something that I haven't really seen from the other guys who pitched in that game, other than Ackenhausen, of course.
It's likely to be worth it to it's a probable throw of the dice in terms of using Moffitt as you go down the road here, because number one, he's got the stuff. He looks like he's improving. And number two, well, you got to go to somebody when everybody else is used up. So let's talk about the week ahead. LSU, this is the final midweek game of the season on Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Tuesday against Northwestern State. And then they head off to Tuscaloosa, 6 p.m. Friday, 4 p.m. Saturday, 1 p.m. Sunday. We've discussed them obviously a little bit as they're coming down the road. They will have presumably a much easier time on their final weekend of the season against Auburn, which is the worst team in the league at 4-20 in conference play. But nonetheless, just tell us a little bit about the week ahead for LSU and what's likely for them, what's plausible for them, and so on and so forth.
A win on Tuesday.
Sure.
I don't think Northwestern State's quite as lowly as Grambling was, but they should probably win that game by the run roll.
If they win, they win. If they don't, they don't. I mean, I don't mean to be cavalier about that. Certainly, a loss is not what you want.
If they don't, then it puts a pretty. I think it honestly puts a pretty big dent into the A&M loss, because they already have the Southern loss on their resume. So that's
true.
So that's 2 losses against teams that I assume are outside the top 100 in RPI, maybe even the top 150.
It's a safe assessment.
I'd have to look it up to be sure. The RPI could confuse you sometimes. Like right now, the highest team in RPI that LSU's played this season that's not in conference play is Xavier.
Yeah.
Xavier, I think, is right around where LSU is right now in RPI. I think they're like in the mid 30s. At least they were heading it. I think they were 33, 34 heading into Sunday. So yeah, I know it is a little surprising. The next highest team is Louisiana Tech, which is also kind of surprising. And I know Texas is playing a lot better baseball lately, even though I think they're like 50th in RPI right now, but they're playing a lot better baseball. That should help out with the resume if we're doing resume talk right now.
Yeah. LSU's 4-11, I think, versus quad one, so that's not a great look, a great move.
Yeah, but this week can help with that. It's two more wins to that, more wins to that ledger, and it's not just 2 wins against any other top 25 team in RPI.
Consensus number one.
It's the number 1 team in RPI, and I think I'm pretty sure they're still the number 1 team in RPI even after this past weekend. So that's huge. And then I think UL has dropped quite a bit in RPI. They've played much worse baseball lately. I think they're weirdly still ranked in D1 baseball. I don't know why, but I think they just lost their series to Troy, who we mentioned earlier is going to play Alabama. So all this stuff sort of connects. Funnily enough, but I think they're around 55th in RPI. And I mentioned those teams because the non-conference stuff kind of matters a little bit too if we're gonna go into the nitty gritty of how. Of this team trying to make the tournament, and one of the things that probably hurts this LSU resume a little bit is the fact that their non-conference schedule just wasn't that difficult this year.
That's true.
Despite the fact that the record, they're probably going to finish the season at 23-3 in non-conference play if they win on Tuesday, and that's a very impressive record. There's very few teams in the country that have a record that's that good in non-conference play. But at the same time, like some of those games were against Grambling, teams like Grambling, and that's just not going to really boost up your resume that much, RPI or not, even if they've gotten a little bit lucky with the RPI with Xavier and Louisiana Tech.
Certainly.
So you just sort of hope that these A&M wins can really boost their resume, and if they can finish out the season with 5 straight victories in SEC play, and then maybe a victory or 2 in the SEC tournament, even if they lose in the SEC tournament the first weekend, I think they have a shot to get the 13. Because the 2021 team lost their first game in the SEC tournament, only won 13 conference games, and they got in.
Right.
And they thought they were going to get in based on the rest of the country. But every year's different.
The selection committee's different, and I believe we discussed this on the last podcast. Same as March Madness, what if there's some other bid snatcher, some 6th place team out of the MAC or whatever wins the MAC.
That's why you don't want to
tournament.
lose that game.
That's right. So you want to do everything you can, obviously, to put yourself in a good position. But anyway, tell us a little bit about Alabama. A first-year coach, obviously, and they've maybe done a little bit better than expectations. Not haven't set the world on fire, but they've done better certainly than preseason expectations.
Yeah, a lot of transfers on this team. They had a lot of turnover from last season's team. That was a very good team, and they hosted a regional last year, but they just lost a lot, and they had to go to the portal to sort of revamp. And in pitching wise, they've been maybe a tad disappointing. I think they only have 1 starter who has a sub-5 ERA in conference play, and they were ranked heading into this week, but weirdly enough, they actually have a worse record than LSU.
Worse overall record.
And I think, again, that has a lot to do with the whole non-conference thing that we've been talking about. The fact that the non-conference competition that LSU has faced has really boosted up their overall record, even if they're kind of a lot of these wins have been empty wins for them. So that's why you still sort of see them in limbo with the likes of Alabama. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the breakdown on Alabama, and it's going to be a really interesting series heading into this weekend.
We will be sure to make food recommendations for you so you don't go starving in Birmingham and Tuscaloosa. Where I guess you won't be going into Birmingham, so you go straight to Tuscaloosa. There'll be should be some spots in Meridian, Mississippi, and places like that before you get there. You're not going to go starving. Follow Koki as he traipses through the Southland, as he goes on the road one final time here in the regular season. And
then go back to Alabama 2 weeks after that.
That's right. You'll be
probably.
We don't know if you'll be there for one or 2 days or perhaps the whole week, because who knows how long LSU may stay in Hoover. They look pretty good to make it into Hoover right now. They still got to get business taken care of though. to make sure that they do qualify for the SEC tournament, and then off from there, they've got some work to do to make sure they get into the NCAA regionals, and it's an uphill battle still. So, but this weekend was certainly a huge step in the right direction. So, follow Koki wherever he goes, all over this fine land, covering LSU baseball for The Advocate. Subscribe to The Advocate, of course. We would love for you to do that and join us. This is the number one destination, as we say, always for LSU sports coverage, and always has been. So whether that's in print or digital, please subscribe to The Advocate. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe and stay up to date with everything that's going on with LSU with our LSU newsletter. To sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That way you get everything, all the headlines sent to your phone, to your desktop, to your inbox, all in one spot. We are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider, on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube, you should be able to find it. You'll find the page. You can subscribe. You'll never miss an episode that way. You can catch us live on Mondays and Thursdays, and if you don't catch us live, as we say, you can always catch us after the fact on that same YouTube channel. If you prefer to get your podcasts in a more traditional way, you can always check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. Follow and subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you like on Apple Podcasts. That will help us find more LSU fans, and it will help more LSU fans find us. Just search for LSU Sports Insider. Koki, it's been a pleasure. This was certainly a more pleasant weekend, probably than most LSU baseball fans have had for much of this season.
Absolutely.
Certainly since March. So they've made it interesting. They've given us a reason to really pay attention to them as we go down the stretch. And of course, as we know, here in Louisiana, everybody loves having a good old-fashioned crawfish boil while watching LSU make a run for the postseason. So we will see what happens as we go down the road, and perhaps LSU can pull this one off. For Koki Riley, for Amelia Cotton behind the glass, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.